Hi everyone, and welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I'm doing a very special video because, well, we're finally getting down to the final episode of Succession. It's quite an incredible journey following this show. I know I haven't been talking about Succession on this channel, but I will tell you I have been following the show for quite some time now. I actually started watching it just roughly before season 2 had premiered, just because there was the word of mouth and it was just really grabbing my attention a little bit. And just again, a lot, considering the fact that the show is kind of like a modern day business-like version of Game of Thrones, that really caught my attention. And so, of course, I've been following it for quite some time now. I was there watching the season 2 finale. I was there watching season 3 finale. And now here I am about to get down to the final episode. Who would have thought that we were about to get down to the final episode? I'm pretty sure, from what I recall, none of us really knew that season 4 was going to be the final season up until I think a month before season 4 had premiered. It became quite a shock for all of us, but we also knew that meant that we're probably going to get the biggest question answered, and that is who's going to take over as a CEO for Waystar Royco, right? That has been the biggest question since the first episode, since the pilot episode. And now we're finally getting down to the culmination of the show, and that is answering this big question. And of course, season 4 has been quite a journey. I mean, a lot of us are still looking back at Connor's wedding and just the shock of Logan Roy's death. A lot of us didn't expect that to happen, but at the same time, it was an event that was, of course, necessary, because that meant that we're finally getting down to the end game of this show. And that is, again, the big question of who's going to take over as CEO. And, having just watched everybody, right? We've been seeing how every single person in this show has been very calculated with their moves, right? We've seen all the siblings having their own personal game, trying to play their dices, trying to be in some ways in the same league as Logan. And we've seen some of them, have, reached that summit in some ways, but in other cases, they really had too many shortcomings. And now having watched all these episodes, I think we finally got to a point where it's time to really just go down to the final rankings of who has the best chance of becoming the next CEO of Waystar Royco. Because this is now going to be the big deal of going to the series finale. And of course, there's no one that could really, reach the level of Logan Roy's, a legacy. For one thing, he's still a very horrible person. And a lot of people feel conflicted about him, but you also have to respect him, at least as a businessman who really knew how to play the dice. He really knew how to play the checkerboard. He knew what move to make. And that's something that you have to respect him for, because he knew what to do in terms of being a businessman, which meant having to kind of make a lot of sacrifices, especially within his own family. And now here it is, who's going to be able to replicate Logan's legacy? Who is the best person to take over and become the next Logan Roy, right? And yeah, I think, having thought about it very thoroughly about, who has the best chance, I think I finally come down to who I think may have the best chance of taking over as a CEO. So in this video, I'm going to go straight into kind of my rankings of who has the best chance, going from lowest to best chance, and I'll explain my reasons for it. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right down into my ranking of who has the best chance of becoming the CEO of Waystar Royco. Right, so starting off my ranking at the very, very bottom, I am putting Connor Roy. I think at this point, I don't think he has really any strong chance of becoming the CEO of Waystar Royco. I think just the way that we've seen his progression going to the show has been pretty evident that he's just not the type of person that, or at least the best suited person to take over as a CEO of Waystar Royco. Yeah, for one thing, he is the eldest son of Logan Roy. That makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, he definitely does not have any of the experiences that all the other Roy siblings have, right? He's not really that involved with his father's business. He's kind of been ignored. He's been neglected as the sibling / son in this show. everyone keeps forgetting that Connor exists. Like we saw that in Connor's wedding where like everybody's trying to give their final farewell, and then all of a sudden everyone forgot that Connor had his wedding, as well as the fact that he's the eldest son, and that, you know, he didn't have his chance to say goodbye to Logan when he basically passed away. And so, yeah, he's definitely been the one that, you know, has been pretty ignored throughout this whole show, just because, again, like, of the fact that he is pretty different from everyone else around him, because he is the only son of, you know, Logan's first wife. And yeah, I mean, if anything, he's been more of a father figure to the Roy siblings than his own father has to them. But yet he hasn't been the one who, you know, really put in the effort to really get into the business side. And I mean, I think even in this case, like, one of the things that I feel like is one of his biggest flaws is how hubris he is when it comes to just about anything that he does. Like, he thinks so highly of himself, thinking that he is so great at everything, but he's really not. I think it's pretty evident, having seen the whole like election situation where he thought he had such a high chance of like maybe winning Kentucky, and he didn't. Like, I think because of how much he prides himself in things, and again, with the lack of experience, business experience that he has as a Roy sibling, right? Like, he's not something that a lot of people would take seriously. I think we've seen that a lot, where he's just not the most serious contender going into becoming the CEO position. I don't even think he would be, you know, interested in it, although he has mentioned a couple of times, like, okay, why can't I be, you know, a possible contender to become one? But I think at this point, like, I don't think anyone would really want him in that position, whether it be just like the board or Mattson. Like, I think for Connor, he's more geared towards like, okay, how would it benefit himself, and what can he do to use that to his advantage? And I think that that's going to become a big problem for anyone involved who, you know, wants to make their decision of who they can put up as a CEO. And I think just with that, right, like the lack of experience, the fact that he's too excessively conceited with his own sort of accomplishments, and, you know, it's quite the vanity of it. And it's just like, okay, well, there is really no way that Connor can become the CEO unless like something spectacular happens. So I think even at this point, like, I don't think Connor is really in the running for the CEO position unless something really big happens. But even that being the case, I think he has probably the lowest chance of getting the position. I mean, anything could still happen and just become quite the surprise for sure. And that's highly possible. I just don't think that, because of like, you know, he's not too involved in it. He only cares about the wealth. He only cares about the money. He doesn't want to put in the work necessarily. He just wants, again, to live a more lavish lifestyle without having to put in the work. And I don't think that that's going to work out if you're going to become the CEO of Waystar Royco, when you have to actually make all these decisions. Like, even Mattson would not put someone like Connor in, even if he wants somebody who can be his, you know, boy toy, right? So, and I don't even think that Connor is someone who will be like people pleaser. He wants something for himself. So yeah, I think even in that case, like, there's just no way that anybody around would consider him as a contender. So makes it very much likely that he's at the bottom. Makes so much sense. But yeah, he's gonna be right there in the bottom of my ranking as the potential to get the position. Next up, I actually put Roman and Roy pretty low down, and I have a lot of reasons for it. Like, I know with Roman, right, like, when we look at Roman, he has definitely been someone who's been playing the cards pretty big. He's been so involved with the company. He's been at his father's side for quite some time, especially after the whole Kendall situation. Like, he's been, you know, someone that Logan has been, you know, keeping in touch with. Even during the whole like fiasco that happened from season 3, he still kept in contact with Logan. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a possibility that, you know, even after, because let's be honest, right? Like, after the, you know, the unexpected death of Logan Roy, the following episode, there was kind of that controversy of, okay, did Logan scratch out Kendall's name, or did he underline Kendall's name, right? Like, there's still that debate. And if he was, of course, crossing it out and trying to put in someone else, of course, like, if there's somebody that, you know, Logan could trust, it would probably be Roman, just because he's always been in Logan's side, even kind of defying his own siblings when there was that squabble after season 3. So yeah, even with that being the case, right, even though he has a bit more of that experience, he is somebody who has been, very involved with Logan's business. And, he has some, pretty good accomplishments. He's done some good things throughout, like whether it be, for one thing with the Gojo deal. So that'll be one big thing out of it. And then the Mencken stuff, like, yeah, he has the capabilities of really getting people to come to his side, or, having this influence to get, what they want out of, the outcome of things, right? Even with that being the case, I just feel like with Roman, I think his chances have really diminished in a lot of ways. Like, for one thing, I think that he's a very rash character. Like, we saw a couple episodes ago where he fired not just a studio producer, or studio head, but he also fired Jerry from Waystar Royco just because of the fact that, they weren't pleasing him. And even the fact that, he wanted to get that sense of respect. And if he's not getting that respect back, then there'll be consequences. I think that having made that decision was a pretty poor move, because it just shows that he isn't a very serious CEO. I think this is where the biggest problem will be going into the finale, is that he's not a very serious person. Yeah, he has a lot of things that, go into his favor, again, the experience and everything like that. And the fact that he is currently the co-CEO of Waystar Royco can help him. Just even then, like, he's just not someone who's, very serious. Like, we saw that, like, in I believe it was season 3, where he was sending out, the dick pic, right? And Logan himself was just like embarrassed by what he had just seen. Like, he considers Roman as a joke. And if Logan considers him as a joke, then that is not a good sign for someone to become the CEO. And I think that the last episode at Logan's funeral may have kind of solidified his chances of, like, basically may have blew his chances of becoming the future CEO, because for one thing, again, he's somebody who tries to show off as someone who's very confident, who's know-it-all, who has this ambition, who is not afraid to do a lot of risky things. That is totally fine. But at the same time, we can sense this weakness out of Roman. That is that he is just someone who, again, you cannot take seriously. And I mean, that could be a problem, of course, with Matsson. I don't think Matsson's going to consider Roman as a potential contender to become his American CEO. But even if you were to consider anyone else, right? Roman is not really kind of checking his back, right? He's just thinking that he's in the clear. He is somebody, just because of the fact that he was so connected with Logan, that makes him a clear CEO, which it's not technically the case. Just because your father said it doesn't mean that, you're the clear cut, person become the CEO. And unless, like, Roman had been showing himself to prove that he can become the next Logan, I feel like he hasn't really shown that. And I think that after the Logan's funeral, like, he really has shown his weakness. Like, even Mencken is now no longer considering him as a serious person. He doesn't want to even be associated with him, just because, again, Mencken is a Nazi, of course, and he's probably somebody who's just like boys don't cry sort of, ideology. And to see, Roman break down over his father's death, like, that's probably where he's questioning his manhood, I guess. So not only does he not have Manson's support, he's now lost, Mencken's respect as somebody that he can't talk to. Like, we saw the way that he was even talking to him right after the funeral. Like, he was just calling him a weepy boy, right? So yeah, I think at this point, like, unless he can really redeem himself big time in the series finale, I think his chances have really gone down quite a bit. And I think because of that, like, he ranks as probably, one of the lowest amongst, the main Roy siblings to really grab the position, but at least above Connor, because again, he does have a bit more of the experience over Connor. So, but even that being the case, I don't think he is somebody who a lot of people can take seriously, and I think that makes him maybe one of the least likely personnel to really grab that position. All right, so on top of Roman, I put Tom. I know this is gonna be a really controversial decision, and I mean, there's a reason why I put Tom in there. And just because I feel like there's somebody who might be the underdog out of all of this, and it might be Tom. I know a lot of people are very conflicted about Tom, because some people consider him as the villain, and some people kind of sympathize him because of how he's been treated by not just, any of the Roys, but particularly with Shiv. I'm going to say this. I think that there's a reason why I put Tom above Roman, and that is because I think, having seen the last few episodes, He's really shown himself to be a people pleaser for one thing. Like, he is somebody who wants to make sure that, if he wants to keep his position, he needs to make sure that he has everyone's, good side, right? Basically a kiss up. And he's done a great job of doing that. Like, for one thing, he managed to get Logan's trust after season 3. Like, he betrayed his own wife to be on the good side of Logan, because he knew that Logan was basically his protector. As long as he has Logan looking over him, he has a pretty good chance of rising high in the business. And of course, that meant becoming one of the major heads of ATN. Now, of course, like, ever since, Logan had passed away, his, one leverage, his one person who can vouch for him is now gone. He has no one else protecting him. He has enemies all around. He's made an enemy with Shiv. He's made an enemy with, I wouldn't say an enemy with Matsson, but Matsson is not having good impression upon Tom. Like, he has not managed to get, Matsson's trust. And I think, having seen the last episode, Matsson is more likely not to consider him as someone he can use as a puppet. But even that being the case, I think that, having seen the last episode where he is just so tired, he wanted to sleep, I just felt like, okay, well, maybe there might be more of that reset, where things can work out in his favor. And I think one of the things I think is really worth considering is his relationship with Shiv. Now, of course, in the beginning of season 4, things started off really sour between them two because of the fact, of course, Tom had betrayed Shiv. But I think that in the beginning, because of the fact that they were not fighting, it did seem as if their whole marriage was basically at its end. It was basically doomed. But one of the things that really intrigued me was that when we did get to the the election eve episode, the fact that they both fought gave me that glimpse that, like, okay, that the fact that they're fighting, right, means that there are going to, that kind of gives me the indication that their marriage had reignited. Because from what I've always seen is that, like, with marriages, whenever couples are fighting, that just means that they're more likely to care about each other in some ways of some form. And that means that their marriage are more likely to survive far longer. Whereas if they're not fighting, that means they're completely done with that marriage. And I felt like their marriage was completely done in the beginning, but the fact that they fought in that episode of the election eve, that kind of was a reignitement of their marriage right there, which gives me the impression that Shiv and Tom might be the duo working together. So they're going to be working together far more going to the series finale. I think that even with the last episode where Shiv is talking to Tom, and even though Shiv still has a lot of beef with Tom because of, what he said on election night about her pregnancy, I think that after the last episode, they may have resolved a lot of things, just like them finally getting an understanding with each other. And at this point, given how both of them are pretty vulnerable at this point of the stage, knowing that, there's a lot of enemies around them, I would not be surprised if Tom and Shiv decide to work together to try and claim the CEO position of Waystar Royco, because I feel like they'll work better as a team together than working as individual people, right? So I will say this, like, I think this is where it's really tough to kind of rank between some of the people right here, because, like, Tom is such a wild card going into the series finale because he's not technically done yet. And I think that, having seen the previews and seeing, like, there's one scene where he's just, like, walking up, which with behind, I believe, happens to be, like, lawyers, gives me the impression that Tom is not out of the game just yet. Like, he might be able to pull in some last minute cards, like some surprising last minute cards. And I think that that's where I see Tom still having a possible chance. Now, in comparison to everyone else, it's not as strong. But even that being the case, I think that if he does have this chance of teaming up with Shiv, I think that he might be, in the long run, have a very good outcome coming out of the whole situation with Waystar. So that's why I put him roughly above Roman. And of course, like, for one thing, unlike Roman, who kind of really blew up his whole chances, I think that Tom still has a little bit of that flicker of hope for him, just because, again, of the whole ATN thing, the election, the fact that he's kind of reconciling with, Shiv at this point, because now, again, from the last episode, it seems as if they're finally patching up. So with that being the case, again, I think that Tom has kind of regain a lot of hope for him to really kind of still maintain his wealth, his, his high ranking position at Waystar. And I think that might actually help him, and I think even save him in the long run. So again, he's still kind of in the bottom. I feel like he has maybe, again, I don't think he has as much of a strong chance as some of the other, characters who are much better, who have much better chances of becoming the CEO. I think that just because of what we've seen so far with some of the other characters, I think he has a slightly better chance going into it. And plus, I would not be surprised if a lot of people who were Team Tom would want him to become CEO, just because he technically is a Roy but doesn't have the Roy name. And I would not be surprised if this is something that, they will try to pull off. So again, we'll see. Like, this will be more of like a big surprise type of reveal. But again, like, we would have to see how that plays out in the series finale. So up next, I put Shiv Roy as my next likely chance to basically become the CEO of Waystar Royco. I think I would put it as number 4 at this point, just because I think in comparison to a lot of other people, there's a lot of factors that can take into consideration going into Shiv's possibility of getting the position. I mean, I think there's still a long shot of her getting it because of the mistakes that she makes. Like, for one thing, when we are looking at Shiv, right, she is someone who is very bold, who's very audacious. She is very strong-headed. But at the same time, I think the biggest issue that she has is she's very amateurish. She does not understand the game as well as some of the other people in this whole show, and especially in comparison to Logan, right? Like, I think this is where we've seen a little bit of this complexity with, Shiv, where it's like, she's really trying to get the approval of her father, and yet she's just really someone who really messes up a lot. And we've seen that throughout season 3 with this issue, where she thinks that she's kind of winning, but she's really not. I think this is one of her biggest faults going into the show, is that she's very, she kind of thinks of herself too highly, and thinking that, because of, of her own personality and her skill sets, that she's someone who can easily win a position, when that's not really the case. Like, I mean, let's be honest, out of all the Roy siblings, or at least out of the 3 main Roy siblings, like aside from Connor, she is someone who has the least amount of experience. Like, she isn't someone who is that involved with, Waystar Royco. She only started having a position in the company just last season, after having, worked on the whole situation with Crystal Schultz situation, and, dealing with all of that. But yeah, I think even with that being the case, like, even though she got some experience from season 3, it doesn't mean that, she's gotten all the experience yet, right? Like, she doesn't understand the business side of things. She's not really getting the chance to really talk, to make a decision in the, the company. And not just that, right? Like, she's someone who's very ambitious, right? Now, going into season 4, of course, we know that she is working alongside Matsson to make sure that, Gojo is able to acquire Waystar. And, she thinks that this is something that's going to work in her favor, because if she's working with Matsson, this would mean that she can become the CEO. She thinks that by helping him, she will get her reward of becoming the next CEO. Which I think that she may have, overthought this too much. And maybe didn't think quite clearly about it, because again, I think this is where we're seeing more of her amateurish side, because she's not really kind of thinking 2 steps forward. Like, one of the things with Logan is that he's somebody who tries to make sure that he can pinpoint every single move from everyone, and if there is going to be any move that goes against him, he's going to somehow mitigate that action by having his own move, his own leverage to counteract that, right? I think this is something that, again, Logan has done such a power move for, and that made him such a respectable CEO, because he knows how to, counteract all these actions, whether it be the whole sexual assault situation, the fact that Kendall kind of went against him, or all that sort of stuff, right? And I think with Shiv, she just does not have that, experience. I think she does not have that gift from her father to really kind of understand that. I think this is, again, when we're seeing a far more naive side of Shiv, who doesn't understand that just because she is siding with Matsson doesn't mean that Matsson's not going to go on his promise. Or I don't even think he even promised her anything. Like, he doesn't have to make any promises, right? Like, for him, he just wants to see whatever move works in his favor, and that is making sure that even if he does put someone else in the, as the CEO of Waystar, that he's still the one making the top decisions. And of course, like, for someone like Shiv, who is, again, someone who's very ambitious, someone who's very strong-headed, someone who is, who wants to do things in her own way and not be, commanded. I think this is where like someone as Madsen would understand that this is not someone who he wants to work with. He doesn't think that he would, someone would fit with him to make sure that, his opinions, his decisions are going through. And so, yeah, I think that going into, again, as we saw in the penultimate episode, like, yeah, she has been a very good advisor to Madsen. She's been giving him some really great advice, trying to put out the false numbers from India, the fact that, the whole situation with his, his head of communications. Yeah, like she's been someone who is giving him great advice for sure, but it's not going to work out for her in the end. Like she's trying to push in that, promise that, okay, well, if you do this for me, I'll get this in return, but she's not really putting in the leverage. We've seen cases where just because she is showing herself as someone who is very confident, who may seem scary, or she considers herself scary but isn't really, we've seen the case where like she tries to one up someone and it doesn't really do anything. Like, let's remember election night, right? She's trying to scare, Greg into like making sure that he doesn't reveal her secrets, doesn't reveal the fact that, she is working for Madsen. And what does she do in return for his silence? She gives him nothing, right? This is where, again, we're seeing this very, amateur-like situation where she doesn't have the skill sets to deal with a lot of these, negotiations. She's not a very good negotiator, basically. And this is where it's going to bite her very badly, especially with the whole Madsen situation. Because if this can happen with Greg, then I can't even imagine how Madsen will basically just, basically annihilate her in like the whole CEO situation. Because even though she does give him the idea of making sure to put in an American CEO to encourage Mencken to, to allow the Gojo deal to go through, like, remember that scene where he says, yeah, as long as we put, like, he agreed to the whole, as long as there's an American CEO, the, acquisition is going to go through, but he didn't say that it was going to be her, right? And I think that having seen her reaction, thinking that, oh, she's in a good position, once again shows that she's very naive. She's not thinking very, she's not thinking very strategically that, this is not a good sign for her, because he did not put any promises for her that she will be put up as a CEO, but that he can put someone else as a CEO and it just won't be her. And I think this is where Shiv is going to get that bad news really badly when we get to the series finale, when she realizes that, Madsen basically backstabbed her. Well, I don't know if you can really say if he would backstab her, but, she would feel like she'll feel really stupid. Like she's going to have this really stupid moment just realizing that, she helped this guy all this time only to see that she got nothing in return. And again, this shows again her, her incapabilities to really do this negotiation style. Like she doesn't have that, skill set that Logan has. Now, having said that, like, even though like she's really kind of reduced her chances of becoming CEO because of her inability to really just, be that scary CEO, that scary person that, no one wants to mess with, right? She doesn't really have that respect in a way that a lot of other characters have in showing this power play. Like she's someone who's trying to show herself as someone who is capable of doing things, but she's really not. And again, showing herself showing this vanity of herself where she thinks she's so, good at things when she's really not. And I think that's going to, again, become a big fault, like a big flaw for her going into this, and it's going to basically cost her her chances of becoming CEO. Now, having said that, as I said before with Tom, I think it could go either way between her and Tom, but I think this is where there could be some potential of increasing her chances. That is, if we see in the series finale that not only do they reconcile, not only are they continuing off their marriage, but I can see a chance where, because of the fact that, there's just so much of this hit coming from everyone, that I would not be surprised if Tom and Shiv decide to work together because of what's going on, right? Like, even though there's a lot of things that have happened, there's a lot of drama between them, there's a lot of hate between them, at the end of the day, they're probably going to realize that the best chance they have to becoming the leaders of Waystar is to work together. And I think that having, again, after that penultimate episode and seeing how both of them kind of resolve their matters and, understanding each other much better this time around than they were before. And I feel like at this point, their marriage is a bit stronger than how it was back, in episode 1 of season 4, where, their marriage was a mess. I think that that's where we can maybe see a little bit of her chances improving. Like if she has Tom's backing, then this might help her chances of becoming the CEO. Now, again, it's like, again, a long shot going into this. Like I think at this point, she'll just be more so a long shot than just becoming a really strong contender at this point. But with that being said, I think that she's kind of in the middle at this point because, again, I think Roman's chances have basically kind of died down. I think that the penultimate episode has basically proven that. Like, I think his final chance to kind of like hit back has basically died down. Like, I think he lost his little bit of, opportunity to really just show himself as a strong CEO. I think that because of that helped Shiv in the long run to become a much better chance of becoming CEO. But even with that being the case, like, I think that Shiv still has a pretty low chance of becoming the CEO in comparison to everyone else playing this game. Up next, I actually put Jerry. And so I actually think she has a third best chance of becoming CEO. And I think that she has a lot of things going in her favor than against her. Because again, what's really funny is that I think putting her in as a contender is a really big thing to really just talk about. I feel like a lot of people are ignoring that Jerry still has a chance in this game. And I think this is where she's going to become the dark horse of what's going on throughout as becoming the successor. And I think there's a lot of good reasons why that Jerry could have a very good chance of becoming the next CEO. For one thing, she's not, a Roy. She's not a Roy. She has no connection to the family, which makes her a very good, option for the board or anybody who really wants to elect somebody to become the CEO. Not just that, but I think the big thing we have to consider is that she's someone who knows a lot of things. She's very good at her job. She knows the DOJ. She has all the connections. She's someone who's really smart. She knows what power plays to go through. She's someone who understands the whole business side of things. And I think that's what makes her such a really good, contender in this game. And not just that, but let's remember, she already has a little bit of experience as a CEO. She was an interim CEO back in, I believe it was like season 2 or season 3. It was one of those 2 seasons. But she was an interim CEO because of the whole situation that was going on with, the lawsuits, the sexual assault cases and all that sort of stuff. And I think that makes her a really strong contender because she has no connection with the Roy family. She's someone who knows her job really well. She has all these connections. She's someone who already knows the position very well. And I think that because of all of that, she makes her a very, favorable choice become the CEO. Of course, a lot of things have happened since. Like Logan had wanted to fire her back on Connor's wedding, which of course didn't transpire 100% because like he passed away. Then she eventually did get fired by Roman a couple episodes later, and now she's basically unemployed, but also she's taking legal action against the company because of the wrongful termination. So we'll see how it all goes through. I think that the whole situation with her being fired will play a big part going to the series finale. I think she's still in the running. She's been keeping a low profile, of course, since Connor's wedding, but I think that is probably where we're all now realizing that she's still in the game. Like, even though she's laying low, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's out of the game. I think that just makes her far more quality contender to go in and become the next CEO. I think that even then, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Mattson wants to put her as someone to take over. Because for one thing, let's remember back in the, the summit situation in, what was it, Sweden? Or was it I believe it was Norway or Sweden. But in one of the summit, right, where they were all kind of gathering together between the Gojo and the Waystar people and trying to figure out the deal, right? Out of all the people in the, Waystar company, Jerry was one of the few who wasn't terminated. She wasn't being fired, right? She wasn't going to be let go as a result, right? Because again, for one thing, because she had recommended her that, she's a very good asset for Mattson because of the fact that she has all this connection. And even though, like, the fact that she had this, she was almost fired. She was almost fired once and then fired the second time around. I think that makes her far more of a bigger asset for Mattson because then Mattson realizes that, Jerry could be a very valuable person just because of the fact that she's also not Team Roy. Because Roman basically, fired her off. So I would not be surprised if Matsson even wants to, may even consider as a possible option going into as becoming his American CEO to take over as Waystar. Because let's also remember that Jerry is sort of a kiss up in a way. She's somebody who wants to make her bosses happy. And I would not be surprised if Jerry is someone that Matsson thinks that he can, at least influence in a way that goes in his favor. So, and not just that, but again, the fact that she has all that experience makes her a very valuable asset in that case. Now, of course, I feel like in that, that scene where Matsson is, speaking with Shiv and telling her about, putting in an American CEO to get Menken's backing to, approve the whole acquisition. I think that there is somebody talking across Matsson about the whole situation who could actually be his choice of becoming the American CEO. And of course, I feel like it's not Jerry, of course, because if we remember that scene, Jerry wasn't anywhere else, but she was still in the hotel room after Logan's funeral, where she's talking with Hugo, Frank, Gary, all of them, right? So unless somehow she was in two places at once, I don't think that's her that's talking. That is at least, sitting across from Matsson when he made that call. So it probably might not be Jerry, of course, but even if she might not be in Matsson's radar, I think that even then, with everything that's going on, because I feel like there's still the whole situation with the board that, the Roys have to deal with regards to the whole acquisition, the deal, and trying to improve it, that if the whole, go to a thing fumbles, or if, let's say the board does not agree to, my particular choice as becoming, or at least Matsson's particular choice as becoming the CEO, then I will not be surprised if there's going to be a compromise to put someone as Jerry in there, because it'll work in the board's favor and also will work in Matsson's favor, because she's someone who is probably the best, or at least the most ideal candidate who can, who gives the advantage for either side. So I think that she's probably one of the best contenders going into the game, even though she hasn't really been appearing much. But I think that's what makes her such a very valuable character going into it. I think that what makes her such a good contender, because it'll be quite the surprising one, and I would not be surprised if somehow we get a huge shock coming out of nowhere and somehow it becomes Jerry. So yeah, I think that she's not out of the running. I think she's someone who is as strong in this whole competition compared to everyone else. And I think that she actually has far more to prove as a potential CEO than anybody else in this. I think that she has really proven it. So yeah, I think that I think she has the third best chance of getting that position. I would not be surprised, with all the reasons I mentioned, that she could get the position as the permanent CEO of Waystar Royco. Next, the person I put as my number 2 of becoming the CEO of Waystar is other than Greg Hirsch. And I feel like a lot of people are so conflicted with this, because when we are looking at Greg, a lot of people are the way that people are comparing Greg as the potential winner in a sense, or the potential, person to take it all, is in a sense comparable to how Bran, became the king, became the ruler of King's Landing. It's just such an unusual choice. And also it's not a lot of us would want that, but at the same time, I feel like in this case with Succession, the argument going in favor of Greg is far better than the way that we saw with Bran. I think in this one, there is a lot of reasons why Greg could be the person to take over as CEO. There's a lot of reasons for it. I think we've seen it day by day in each episode, where he has now become such a strong contender in becoming a CEO. For one thing, yeah, he is the cousin of the Roys, so he has all that family connection, although not necessarily, but he has it, right? He's been working with the, Waystar Royco for quite some time now, working alongside, Tom. He's been working ATN. Yeah, he has been a bit of a joke, of course, even in the sense where it might even be worse than Roman being a joke, because he is someone who has made so many mistakes time after time, someone who doesn't realize that, he is not someone who's very confident about a lot of things that he does. And of course, he's a kisser upper. But here's the thing, this is where, because he is someone who's a kisser upper, it really comes into his advantage, because for one thing, he wants to make everyone who's above him happy, right? And I think what really makes him such a really good candidate is that he's someone who has a lot of leverage. And I think this is where we see a lot of the Logan plays coming in with Greg, because he's someone who understands what is going on. He knows the gossip. He knows the rumors. He knows how to play them out to his advantage. We saw this happen a couple of episodes ago on election night, where he used his knowledge of Shiv working with Matsson to his advantage to make sure that he gets into, Kendall's good side if Kendall ends up becoming the permanent CEO of Waystar, right? And not just that, but we've seen time after time, like, he is someone who has been surprising everyone. Like, for one thing with Matsson, right? Matsson had no respect for him. Like, let's remember that summit. He had no respect for him. Like, he thought he was a joke. He thought he was someone who was just like, he was just there for nepotism, which of course there is. Like, there is a clear nepotism about it. But after having, after the whole party on the election eve episode, and having actually spoken with him, talked to him, realizing that he's someone who's willing to fire anybody without having any sort of sentiment about it, like having no sort of guilt about it, right? That has definitely impressed Matsson in a big way. And I think this is where, like, he's really starting to get Matsson's good side. Because, again, if he's someone who's a kisser-upper, if he's someone who has no qualms about the actions that he makes, as long as it's something that, it puts him in good, into good shoulders of other people, then that's a good thing for Matsson. Because, of course, if Matsson's going to put somebody as his American CEO for Waystar, then he needs someone who is willing to fulfill his commands whenever he has something that he needs to, kind of go through in his own favor, right? Just because of the fact that, Greg could be the American CEO doesn't mean that he's the one who's going to make all the deals. He's the one who's going to take the whole charge of it. It's still going to be Matsson, right? He's just going to be kind of communicating it to him. And, Greg is just going to be the one who is going to just execute those actions, right? And that's what we've seen so far this whole season, that he's someone who's willing to do whatever he needs to be done, just as long as it means that he's in someone's good side, right? And not only does he have the good side of Matsson, but he's also on the good side with Kendall, right? So he has everyone's good side right now, aside from Shiv, of course. And I don't think that Shiv has that much of a great position right now going into the whole CEO position. But right now, if we're going to be looking at it all, some of the biggest contenders right now we're seeing as becoming the CEO is going to be Matsson, Kendall. And I think that with both of them, they kind of trust Greg in any way possible, knowing that he is someone who has all the information. He's someone who has all the knowledge around him. He has a leverage. He's someone who understands what's going on around him, and he's willing to spill the beans as long as there's something in return for him. And and so far, like, that has worked in his favor big time going into the last few episodes, right? Like, before he was kind of a joke, but now he has really stepped it up big time in the last few episodes. Let's not also forget the fact that, he was there at, Logan's funeral. He was one of the barriers for his, casket. That makes him a very, ideal person right now, knowing that, okay, well, here's Greg. He's now really presenting himself out to the world. And knowing that, again, he is the nephew of Logan Roy, that kind of increases his chance of getting a far more better chance of becoming a CEO because of it. So I feel like there's a lot of ways where with Greg right now, there's just a lot of things where a lot of people can get the sense that he's someone who they can take good control of. And because of the fact that he's someone who's willing to kiss up, who's willing to be a people pleaser, as long as it works in his favor, and making sure that he has everyone's support, everyone's favor, like, he is the one at the end of the day really rising up to the occasion. I would not be surprised if, because of all these qualities that Greg has shown himself, that this is going to pay off in a big way for him, and that has become the CEO. And I think that, again, thinking about the penultimate episode where, Matsson was talking to Shiv about the whole American CEO situation, I think the person who is sitting across from Matsson, I feel like it has to be Greg. I think I feel like that's a clear cut, answer to, like, everything. I feel like the person who is sitting across from him has to be Greg, just because, again, their relationship has really kind of gone really strong since the last few episodes. Again, the fact that Matsson's starting to respect him a little bit. And I think that not just that, but I think that Matsson understands that he is someone who's a very big advantage to his own position of making sure that acquisition goes through. Like, if it goes through, of course, that would mean that, Greg is probably going to become the CEO. So again, I think Greg is someone, of course, for the fact that, he's not someone who a lot of people would want to be as a CEO, just because he hasn't been the most central character. He has definitely been more of a supporting cast, and of course, like, someone kind of who's been, the number two for basically to Tom, of course. But I think that, again, like, because of his experiences going into it, the fact that, again, we've seen so much of what he's done so far in the company, that he has one of the strongest chances of becoming the CEO. And yeah, it might become a very Brand the Broker vibe right there because he hasn't really been the biggest player, or again, a lot of people would have considered him as at the bottom of the food chain of really just becoming a CEO. I think that a lot of people are underestimating him and his abilities as someone who has been working in the company for quite some time now, and are not understanding that he is someone who has possessed a lot of the skill sets and experiences, and he's willing to kind of dodge anyone down if it means for his own good, right? So I think that's where I feel like he has a second best chance. I think that he has one of the strongest chances going into the finale as becoming the next CEO, especially if the Matsson acquisition goes through, right? So if the Gojo and Waystar deal gets approved and, Roman and Kendall are not able to stop it in time, and Matsson gets full control of Waystar, I think at that point it's very clear it's going to be Greg. It's going to be Greg if it's not anyone else. So yeah, I will say, just don't be surprised if Greg somehow wins. Somehow he becomes a CEO because of that fact. Of course, again, for that to happen, it has to be the whole Matsson situation. I don't think that if, Kendall becomes the CEO, that it's going to be Greg who takes over. No, it's going to be, if Matsson gets the acquisition to go through, that would mean that Greg is the definitive person to become the CEO. There's no argument about it. And it's going to happen if it goes in that route. So, and then there's a lot of situations, a lot of hypotheticals to kind of think about, but if it goes in one route with Matsson becoming the winner, then Greg also becomes the winner. So I'm just giving a warning right there. But yeah, I think that Greg has a really strong chance, even though a lot of people are trying to dismiss this as a possible scenario. But it could be it's one of the strongest scenarios going into the series finale. I think the person who is most likely to win this position as the CEO, who is the likeliest person to become the successor of Logan Roy, who has the best possibility of becoming the next, CEO of Waystar Royco, it's got to be Kendall. There's no competition about it. So now, of course, there's a lot of ifs, but I'll say this, right? Having seen season 4, right? I mean, we've seen in previous seasons where Kendall has been kind of a screw up, right? He has really kind of had some issues, in some of the early seasons. Logan kind of, betraying him in some cases, not allowing him the chance to become the CEO. He was originally supposed to have taken over the company until the whole situation with Logan, his health. And then, of course, he's just someone who, again, early on kind of was a screwball in a sense where, he just hasn't been able to really show his full potential as a potential successor, which, again, may have questioned a lot of Logan's, choice of deciding who can, succeed him, right? And of course, he kept betraying Logan. He, screwed up a lot of times. And of course, the whole situation with, back in season 1 where he kind of did commit manslaughter. That's something that we need to take into consideration as well. So that's something I got to think about with Shiv as well, is that if she's going to have any leverage, then of course, then the one leverage she does have is that Kendall has committed manslaughter, and that could become a big situation. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen, of course, but I think having seen season 4 so far, I think that one of the things that we have to see is that we've been seeing quite the transformation with Kendall. Ever since Logan's passing, we've been seeing such a dramatic transformation with Kendall. For one thing, right? The fact that he became the co-CEO has really kind of played a big deal for him. I mean, of course, let's not forget the whole underline or crossed off situation that really kind of questioned his own mindset of whether or not, this is what his father wanted. But I think what I have to say about Kendall is that the way that we're seeing Kendall grow in season 4 and the way that he's very, ambitious and very calculated about becoming the CEO is that he's basically having his own Michael Corleone sort of vibe going on. This is where I'm getting a sense of the Godfather playing out in this whole season and I'm saying this because I think the way that we've seen with Kendall is that the more we've seen each episode, the more he's becoming like Logan and showing off that he's willing to make a lot of hard choice if it means, trying to protect the business, right? For him, he's starting to realize that the business is what's really important. That means sometimes having to sacrifice some people around him. And he's having seen some of the things that he's done so far, he is making those harsh decisions. Like, for one thing, like, he's trying to think like his father, and he's been doing such a pretty good job of doing that. Like, for one thing, like, subtly putting on the press about, Logan's real personality, kind of who Logan really is to the public, and making sure that it doesn't kind of come straight back to him, making like a sly move right there. And the fact that, he wants to keep the company is one big factor, but also that he's very ambitious and wants to make sure that if he wants to keep the company, then he needs to like do so in a way that really makes the company very impressive. But also at the same time, like, even though he is a co-CEO of Waystar right now, we can clearly tell he doesn't want that to be the case. He wants to become the sole CEO, and he's willing to backstab Roman for that matter. And I think the last episode has really kind of solidified a lot of what's going on, right? Because he literally just told Roman, saying that he basically screwed up, that he messed up big time. And the way that he speaks to him, like, you really get the Logan vibes. Like, he basically tears him down so harshly in that scene, which, like, that this is what Logan would have done. He would have just smashed down Roman in a way that would have hurt his own feelings. And we can just see from that scene, Logan, like, the way that we see Kendall, just the way that he's speaking to him, like, he has no qualms. He has no sentiment about it. Like, he's trying to be nice about it, of course. The way that he's reacting to it, like, all sort of Logan vibes coming. Like, the more that we're seeing Logan, the more that we're seeing Kendall in every episode, I feel like we're seeing more of Logan kind of coming beneath him. And I think this is where it's like, again, I'm considering this as a very Michael Corleone moment, because he has been someone who's really transformed the most throughout this whole season, showing off as someone who's the most, capable in the most capable in the position of CEO. He's been the one who's making the big decision. He is the one who's actually taking charge of the company more so than Roman has. The fact that has far more experience in the business. He's actually been with Logan for quite some time before the whole situation before season 1, right? I think that because of all of that it makes Kendall such an ideal candidate to become the CEO. Like, I think out of all the siblings so far, I think the one who we've seen the most kind of emulate a lot of Logan has been Kendall. We've been seeing that. I think another good example has been his conversation with Hugo, saying, okay, hey, I want you to work with me and make sure that you're working with me. And even though he's going to treat him as a dog, just realize you're going to get a lot of money. And the fact that he got such respect from Hugo was a big power play. I think that this is the thing. He is someone who knows how to put the power play. He knows how to be strategic. He's finally putting leverage upon everyone, and he's sensing that. And now, of course, going into finale right now, he knows that his big problem is that Mencken, having seen, the way that he is cozying up with Matsson, is now going to be a big problem for him, because now that puts the whole situation with Waystar in jeopardy. He does not want this acquisition to go through. So, of course, he's going to have to figure out how to undo that mess, so that way he can still become the CEO. And I think there's a lot of things that we can take into consideration, of course. Like, for one thing, I feel like one of the things I think that could be a big play is election night. I feel like the whole situation with election night may be far from over. I think that this is where we might see Kendall taking that to his advantage, knowing that if Mencken is not going to be working alongside them, then he has his own leverage. He might have his own leverage against Mencken. Now, as to how he's going to execute that, I don't know. Maybe he might undo it. The whole situation with Wisconsin, I have no idea. But I feel like if he is able to think straight about some of the power play, trying to figure out the leverage, trying to figure out the collateral of it all, I think that it might go into Kendall's favor. Now, of course, if Kendall is able to somehow accomplish all of it, keep the company, become the sole CEO, this is going to come at a cost, right? There is going to be a cost associated with this, and there's no denying that. There's going to be some sort of cost to his decisions going through. There's going to be some sacrifices. This might mean having to break off his ties with his siblings. The fact that he might, for one thing, with his family, that's been a big thing that they've been mentioning so far. Like, we saw in the last episode how he's trying to, go to court against his ex-wife because of the decision that she made about taking the kids out of New York, or at least out of New York City, and taking them upstate. The fact that he's going to try and do that, that's going to be like a huge thing. The fact that he's trying to, like, again, we're seeing a lot of Logan inside him, where it's like, for him, it's business first and everything else later. And if it means having to drag down his siblings to reach that position, he has no qualms about it. He's not going to think twice about it. He is going to realize that there's going to have to be some, there's some things that he has to give up. There's some things that he needs to take some harsh decisions, which could, potentially cost any sort of relationship he still has left with his siblings, his family, with anybody who's close to him, right? But if it means that it's going to land him this possibility of becoming the CEO of Waystar and keeping the company as well, so that way he is the one taking in charge, then I would not be surprised if Kendall does that. Again, a lot of Michael Corleone power play, a lot of vibes out of it. I feel like this is, again, where I feel like at this point, like season 4 will get a bit of that, Godfather vibe, just because of the fact that Kendall is the one who's the most capable of what's going on and playing the game. And unlike, Roman, who's very rash, who doesn't really think twice about his actions, who, thinks too highly of himself and not realizing that that's going to become his fault in the long run. I think with Kendall, he's someone who is trying to be a bit smarter with the plays that he makes. Like, remember back in election night, like, he didn't go full on in support with Mencken, right? Like, he wants to see who is going to, back him up in this whole acquisition situation, right? Who's going to be in his side? And of course, like, after the whole Mencken conversation, he decided to side with Mencken because it's a strategy, not because he thinks he's a better candidate, but it's just such a strategy, right? And I think that now that that's becoming a bit of a conflict for him, of course, now he needs to think other ways to really kind of, deal with the whole situation with the acquisition and having to find every sort of leverage or every sort of outcome that would work in his favor to make sure that he wins on the end. Now, will he win? It's a big if. Because again, if for the chance for Kendall to become the CEO, of course, it would have to rely on the fact that, somehow the Matsson deal falls apart. The fact that, Waystar does not, get obtained by Gojo, but the fact that, it all ends, right? And I would not even be surprised if by the end of it, we can see a reverse play where it is Waystar that ends up buying off Gojo and not Gojo buying off Waystar, right? That will be a lot of the big power plays I could see that would again go into Kendall's favor, which again would show how he is probably the best candidate to become the CEO because of decisions like, the acquisition that would work in his favor. And again, a lot of it is going to go into the whole situation of, okay, who can put, like, where does the outcome go? Is Matsson going to win? Is it going to be Roman and Kendall? If it ends up becoming Roman and Kendall, then of course that would mean that Kendall is probably going to be the one who's going to one up everyone and take over the company in that matter. So yeah, lots of things to kind of consider about Kendall becoming the CEO and whether or not his chances are possible with the whole, scenario with Matsson. But if it does go in his favor, then I think without a doubt, the person who's going to win is going to be Kendall at that point. But it could go either way. So yeah, I think there you have it. Like, this is my ranking for who is going to become who has the best chance of becoming the CEO of Waystar Royco. A couple other predictions I would, consider going into this finale and some of the other things I feel like they haven't really answered. Like, from what I've read is that apparently the series finale feels like, it feels like as if there's more to the story that should be, covered, but at the same time, it does feel like a fulfilling finale. And I wonder if there's going to be a lot of things that happened throughout the last 4 seasons that have happened but haven't been addressed. Like, I think the one thing that a lot of people are wondering is how, the whole situation election night, like, is that something that we're ever going to have the resolution for? Like, does Mencken actually win, or like, does Jimenez somehow won the whole situation? Again, I feel like going into this finale, the election night situation might not be the end of it. We might see more progression out of it. And again, if anyone's going to play off that whole scenario, it's going to be Kendall. But at the same time, there's also other things to consider, right? Like, for one thing, Kendall still has one thing that's going against him, is that the fact that he does have this whole manslaughter that was kind of covered from behind, right? Like, Logan had covered it all up. And considering that he did share that revelation to Shiv and Roman, he's now put himself in a bit of a vulnerable position, of course, because if either one of them realizes that Kendall wants to become the sole CEO and neither one of them want that to be the case, or they want themselves to be the CEO as a result, then either one of them could spill the beans. I think the person who's most likely going to spill the beans for it is going to be Shiv, just because of how strong-headed she is, how she really wants that position. And I feel like if anybody's going to use it against him, it's going to be Shiv more so than Roman. I don't think Roman would do that sort of thing, because I think that even if Roman can be such a harsh person, he's not someone who's going to, like, backstab his family. I think he's one person who's least likely to backstab anyone. I think whereas Shiv is most likely to do that. We've seen her actually do that before back in season 3, where she said some really mean stuff about Kendall in that, statement that she made at the time when they were kind of feuding, kind of disputing a little bit at that time, and they were kind of like in their separate ways. So again, I feel like if anyone's going to use it against him, it's going to be Shiv, but we'll see if she can use that to her advantage. Other things, again, I feel like I mentioned election night, I mentioned about the manslaughter situation, I mentioned about how Tom and Shiv are probably going to work together in the whole situation. If it means, again, like if it works in their favor, working together, then kind of working, opposite from each other. So better to have two minds than one. Other things I can consider, someone else just becoming the CEO. Like, could not even be any of the people in the contention to really become CEO. It could just be some random person who takes over. Like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. Again, like if it's going to be anything, it's going to be something from like the board or something from Mattson. It could go in any sort of scenario with that. Or again, like we don't know what's going to happen with the company itself, because again, the company has dealt with so many issues before, and I wouldn't be surprised if something, unexpected happens with the company where they kind of have to shut down. I highly doubt it, but a possibility. I think that's kind of a lot of things I've mentioned before. Again, we don't know what's going to happen going into the finale because there's just so many things that haven't been resolved. I wonder again, like for one thing, if the whole lawsuit that Jerry has is going to play a big part in Roman's downfall. Like, I don't know if that's going to become a big case. Yeah, there's just a lot of things to take into consideration going into the finale. And again, it's going to be a 90-minute finale. There's going to be so many things going on. So I would imagine a lot of people are going to be putting some big play moves. And we'll just see again who ends up, winning the whole game, who becomes the successor, right? Hence succession, right? So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about my predictions for the series finale. This was my ranking, who I believe, has the lowest to highest chance of becoming the CEO of Waystar Royco. I mean, I think again, it could come down to either Greg, Kendall, or Jerry. I think they're the ones who have the best chance of becoming the CEO. Again, some of it might be controversial, some of it might be, agreeable, right? I think that this is what I think would end up becoming the case going into the finale. Again, just taking consideration what we've seen in the last 4 seasons, as well as some of the more recent episodes, how everyone has been playing around with, playing their chessboards, basically. How are they putting their moves into going into the series finale? And again, I cannot even believe that we're finally getting down to just one episode, but I'm excited to see this final episode. I'm excited to see who ends up winning, if anybody wins. If everyone wins, I doubt everyone's gonna win, but but someone's going to win. We're gonna have a lot of losers, and this is gonna be quite a finale to watch. So with that being said, that's all I have to say about my predictions right there. Let me know what you think about my ranking right here. Like, do you agree with what I've said? Do you think that could be Jerry, Greg, or Kendall as having the best chance of becoming the CEO? Or maybe I'm just being a bit too ambitious, or maybe I may have missed some things here and there. If so, let me know what your rankings are. Who do you think is going to become the CEO? Let me know your top 5 choices, and tell me and give some explanation why, if you can, briefly. And yeah, what are some other predictions you have going into series finale? Are we going to see things with like the election night still coming into play? We're going to still see things like the manslaughter thing situation coming back into the limelight. Is anyone going to play such a big power move in the final episode and shock everyone? If so, like, what could it be? And let me know if you have any other sort of predictions going to the finale, knowing that we're finally getting down to the final episode. Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.